what we teach to our civil servants, the books that they study to enter the civil service. So that is a mainstream narrative. And this mainstream narrative, for some reason, has put partition under the cover. The books that you read, say 20, 30 years ago, NCRT, which every civil servant, or most of us would be, who are in the world of history would know, has 50 or 60 words, one paragraph on the partition of India. I'm talking to the books about the books that were published in the 70s. So, this is one part. Now, this narrative says that partition was unavoidable. It was, it had to happen. It had to happen because we were two nations and we were evolved in different perspectives. So these are narratives that I'll question, and I'll explain to you how these narratives are falsely placed. The second narrative, which really angers me, is that it enjoyed mass support. Now, nothing can be further from the truth than the fact that Partition of India did not enjoy mass support. It did not enjoy any support. It was taken by a handful of people. I've explained in the exhibition at detail. So, and the third problem, the third issue is that it would solve the communal problem, which of course, as we know, it did not. Now, when you look at the past, the school of historians that has developed this narrative, some years ago, rather many years ago, I think it was in Britain, they celebrated the 60 years of independence. I was called as a keynote speaker at Southampton. And after I finished my lecture, a lady, a good friend of mine working at Cambridge, got up and said, why is it that historians from India, particularly North India, come back to England and they say that the horrors of partition? You see, the manner in which the Honorable Prime Minister referred to the horrors of partition, it's not out of the blue. There is a process of thought. This school of history writing, without naming any person, has developed the thing that the whole partition luggage, it was extra baggage. Extra baggage, you're carrying one big suitcase and you have a small bag along. You can leave the bag along, you can take the bag along. Extra baggage. Now, this extra baggage concept, you see, how is it an extra baggage? I'll put some things in perspective. I put it very explicitly in the exhibition. It was the largest peacetime aggression known to the world history. We do not have a parallel example, peacetime. It had the largest number of communal killings that we know of. Communal killings, killing each other for religious basis. The two-nation theory was elitist. A decision was taken by a handful of people. In that, there should be no doubt. The other question to which I'd like to draw attention is that, and to which I've referred to in the exhibition. This lecture, I'm going to interspace it with references to the exhibition because that is the basic purpose. This lecture was an afterthought, in fact. We thought we'll discuss it at a bigger length. So, did Britain have the moral right to partition India? I'm raising this question probably among the first of my colleagues, my friends, both left and right across the country, who have raised this question. Britain in 45 is devastated. It is in no way in a position to hold on to its colonies, small colonies, big colonies, whatever. They have a debt of around 3,000 million pounds. There is no food. There are no work. It is a shattered economy. And then you have the Cold War coming in. So Britain was in no state. See, they could have handled Libya, Siam and so on, Egypt. That's another thing. But for a country going back 10,000 years, for a country that is many, many times richer in every possible way, to have sat on judgment, I am raising this basic question. We should not have given them. Of course, some friends say they were the rulers, they had to rule. So this is one argument. Okay. Now, when you talk of violence, to which the exhibition is very explicit, the accepted figure is around 500,000 to a million. I've heard YouTube pay these days, you can get up and say whatever figure you like. I've heard people quoting 2 million and 3 million. But generally, most scholars of repute who have worked on this subject would agree, even the conservatives would agree that a figure of around 700,000 is an acceptable figure. Now, I'm talking of 700,000 as if it is, today, one person is dead and we have a huge thing on our hands. So we are talking of 700,000 people and all killed within a span of 3 to 4 months. At most, if you cut off March, the violence actually starts in June. So within 3 or 4 months, by the end of September or the middle of October, you have this figure of around 600,000 to 700. Most of them are in Bengal. Fortunately, Bengal saw lesser killings. That, of course, that's another historical perspective. They were more organized. The migration took place mainly from the urban areas. It was not in the Punjab. It's a different story. It's okay. Talking of women, I was referring to our distinguished guest when I was explaining the exhibition that we have an accepted figure of around 100,000 women. Now, these are conservative figures. By conservative, I mean they are traceable to some source or the other. But generally, I was talking to Professor Talbot, who was in Southampton, and so he also agrees. He says, no, Pendle Moon, of course, has said that the figure could go, of women, could go 2 to 3 times. It could be 200,000, could be 300. No one knows. No one can authoritatively say that I know the exact figure. No one knows the figure. We do not know how many women were abducted, how many were violated, how many returned home, how many did not return home. And when you talk of women violation, it is gruesome. I mean, I would feel embarrassed to explain to this audience that what happened in 47 with women. To the extent that Lahore had to Lahore had to build a hospital for women whose breasts had been amputated. A special hospital. You can imagine the brutality of the violence. And please note that the brutality was equal on both sides. Let's not ever be under this perception. That day I got a call from a friend south, no, not a friend, an acquaintance, that, sir, do we have a figure of how many Muslims were killed? I was shocked. I said, you need to reframe your mindset. It's an ugly mind that you have, that you're raising this question. There were Indians who were killed. Whether they were Muslims, whether they were Hindus, please let's not discuss on these lines, okay? Now, the two-nation theory. This is questionable from its very roots. I have often been writing, that India was not a routine country. We were an exceptional civilization. We have evolved over 10,000 years. We are a nation, we are a civilizational nation, if you ask me. We are not a nation based just on religion. So in this, you see, agreed that the Muslim and the non-Muslims had a different evolutionary process. That's understandable. And they had great differences. But these differences were never to an extent that you would say, you cannot live in this village or I will not let you live in this village. This did not happen ever before. I've been studying the Punjab for almost 40 years now. My PhD thesis was on the Punjab. And I challenge any historian to tell me one village in 29 districts of the West Punjab which was an exclusive Hindu village or an exclusive Muslim village or an exclusive Sikh village. This is how Punjab existed. Every British historian, whoever has written sanely, will raise this. How is it that Punjab fell apart? This is a mystery which we really don't know how it happened so suddenly for people who had existed for centuries together. So this two-nation theory is questionable from its roots, and this I will not go further into this. Shekhar, slide 8. Okay. So this was the title of a book that I did in 2006, and it was published, as I said, both by Manhur in India and by Vanguard by Pakistan Times in England, in Pakistan, and as well as by another publisher. See, now this is an accepted theory. The idea of this title, why did I take this book, this title on my title page? To show that Partition of India basically meant killing a living being. Now this tells the whole lot of story. It doesn't require any explanation. That when you cut a living being and then you expect it to live, because they are making the thing walk, the expression on Mountbatten, see, the cartoonists, the illustrativeness of the cartoonist is very rich. If you observe a cartoon very carefully, he tells a story. I would not be able to write 10,000 words to describe this. And we have this beautifully illustrated Civil Military Gazette, which by no stretch, which is a pro-British paper in the 40s. Even they are questioning this. So Civil Military Gazette is raising this issue that it was like killing a living being. Okay. It's very important to understand, the nature of why these killings took place. There are different theories. One theory is that partition was sold as a temporary measure. Partition was sold as a temporary. Now, I picked up this cartoon from somewhere, and as I was explaining in the exhibition just now, we seen that एक जादू वाला जो होता था ना, cutting a person. You cut a person into two and then you put him together. We all have seen that Jadugar thing. So the idea was that don't worry, it's a temporary phenomena and you will sort of get back together. The common man, the Punjab was an agrarian province, rural province. You had a handful of big cities where information was not achievable. So the common man is understanding all the big leaders are saying don't go, don't stay, it's a temporary measure. And by big leaders I mean all. The entire police system, the entire bureaucracy, all the leaders, all the big bankers, all the big advocates, the attorneys, they have changed their properties. In my first book, I showed the classified advertisements. There is an exchange of property going on from January, February 46. So that means by the time partition comes, all the rich people have already exchanged, they have already moved on. So this is something who are the people who have stayed back? Those people who were told that partition is not going to be implemented, or if it is implemented, it will not stay on, it will be reverted. So this should answer the question that I often have to answer in different talks, that why did people get killed? Why did people stay on? Because they thought it is not coming. So this is one part of the story. Okay. See, I belong to Haryana. I'm not from, you see, the emotions that I often, that overtake me in these lectures. I'm married into a family that moved in from the West. And the stories that I've heard, my wife's great-grandfather was the first practicing doctor, the MBBS doctor of the time, And the story, so I got, when I saw this happening, this is how the whole thing evolved in my mind. Now, when you talk of the next issue, that partition was, as I said in the narrative, the false narratives, that partition was the will of the people. This is completely ridiculous, to put it mildly. It is totally ahistorical. We do not have any, I don't know how this narrative is developed. Who are the people who created this narrative? Because no constitutional body, if you say the All India Congress Committee was a constitutional body, Jayaprakash Narayan is questioning it. He says it is a nominated body. Of 400 people who were present on 14 June, when it was voted, 129 supported and the rest sat silent or, they did not participate. In that meeting, Gandhiji walks out of the meeting. There is a spat between Jawaharlal Nehru and Gandhiji. Lohi has quoted it at length in his study, where Gandhiji refuses to acknowledge the fact or refuses to be persuaded by Nehru. Nehru is convincing him, no, we did tell you, we did keep you in the loop. So this is, the approval part, it should be very clearly understood. It was a decision taken by a few people momentarily, and I wouldn't go further on that. Now, if you look at the nature of criticism, I'll just give you 2-3 examples. 13, Shekhar. Next. Now, you have Ajit Singh. The champions of, you see, if you pick up the writings of the time, there is, without fail, without exception, there is criticism, there is opposition. Everyone is saying, the Tribune goes, we accuse those whom Providence has made the architect of our destiny, of accepting the two-nation theory, of describing the suffering as the price for freedom. I could give you 50 more of these. This is the general sentiment of the partition theory in 47, which needs to be clearly understood. I've already referred to the British, the need for the, of course, people would say they were rulers, they had the right to rule, and it's not easy to defend that. Possibly that was, they had no alternative. But this is something that occurs to me whenever I read something or write something on this. Okay. Now, most of us, come sit, come sit. See, most of us have, I started teaching in 77 at the age of 21. The set of books that I was reading, that's of course not in this context, but was, say, R.C. Majumdar's. We studied that whole set of historians which were simply, they have disappeared over the course of time. That is a different issue, of course. Now, the concept of the freedom movement, this is, I'll take 2 minutes to explain, this is key to the whole argument. The concept of the freedom movement was that the British did great harm to us. destroyed our economy, they did this, that, a whole lot of things. Now, the common person, when I was here, these children raising slogans on freedom movement, raising slogans on the greatness of some of our, sometimes the thought occurs to me, do they really know what happened in the last months of 47? But then mentally I feel blocked. I don't want to cross that line. Whether I should refer to that. So I walk between somewhere. Now, if you look at the last months of the British rule, Lord Mountbatten landed in India on the 14th of March. I've just done a well-acknowledged book on Kashmir, where I've developed the thesis, be clear, Kashmir will vote for India. And the book has been very well received. Argumentatively, you may or may not agree with it. I've tried to establish that every single decision following the 14th of March, till the day Lord Mountbatten was in India, I can give you countless, with time constraints, I won't develop too much. Every single decision is influenced by Mountbatten on some way or the other. Partition, of course, is a key. You do not, for young scholars, you don't have to go and dig a well to know the realities. Just pick up the volumes of the transfer of power. Just go to Teen Murti and put on the Mountbatten press. Those that are available, rest of course are in England. But even those that are available here, see his minutes. The British officers had this remarkable habit of leaving detailed minutes. They were very hardworking. There's no doubt about that. If they gave a lecture sometimes, if they talked whatever, anyone who met them, if I bend and pick up a glass of water, you will probably find it in my minutes if I was a British civil servant of the time. So, the details, the manner in which they are interfering in our working. I'll give you a small example. The design for the national flag is being worked out. Jawaharlal calls, the Viceroy calls Jawaharlal. Dekhiye, we are thinking on these lines. Why don't we have a small crescent, the part of the British flag, on the corner of the tricolour? The answer given by Jawaharlal is that, I'll go and let me discuss it with my colleagues. But the extremists in the Congress, this is Mountbatten in his own handwriting, making a note of this meeting. But the extremists in the Congress will not accept it. When I first chanced upon this reference at the British Library, I was amazed. I had not seen it anywhere. The reference is dying. Sadly, Mountbatten's papers are scattered. You have them in the transfer of power, you have them in the Mountbatten files, you have them in Southampton. There are some files which are not yet on record, which are still in the British Library. I called Jinnah. Jinnah says, how nonsense, what nonsense? I had come to meet you for something else, but I will not raise that issue with you now because my mind is too agitated by your proposal. And Jinnah walks out. So, similarly, the meeting of Kashmir, I'll digress from my, when the issue of the United Nations and ceasefire is being raised, Liaquat Ali is in Delhi. I've discussed this at length in my book. And the Prime Minister is to meet Liaquat Ali at 10 in the night. Nehruji is supposed to be at Rashtrapati Government House. Viceroy sends him a message that before you meet Liaquat Ali, just drop in for me for a minute. Nehru goes. Nehru meets Viceroy at 10 in the night. The meeting, which was to last for a few minutes, goes on to 11. And Nehru also was, this remarkable habit is not limited to British officers. Nehru also left, if you know, those who are familiar with Nehru will know that he had a set of stenos in the night and his dictations would go on to 2 or 3 in the night. So you have remarkable readings. If you just want to see how notes are made, you have to study Nehru's extempore notings. So he dictates that Mountbatten advises him that you are going to Liaquat Ali se milne ja rahe hain aap. So assure him, give him some assurance कि हम United Nations में जाके हम plebiscite करा देंगे. The complexities of the Kashmir problem. So the idea actually originated in this historic meeting. This is the role that Mountbatten is playing. Countless, I could go on, I could narrate you 10 other stories. But just to emphasize and impress on you the fact that no key decision is being taken at this time without the influence of Lord Mountbatten. This should be clearly understood in the context of partition as well. Now, often this question is raised. Why did we prepone? We all are aware that 20th February 47, Clement Attlee said that we are going to leave India. Fair. The idea was that they would leave India by the middle of 48. Okay. 20th February, Nehru also welcomes this. So we have this British civil servant who has just joined as Governor of Punjab, Sir Evan Jenkins, whose photograph I fit enough to display. There's a reason for this. My friends asked me, why should we have his photo? I said, no, there is a story. It has to be told. A brilliant servant who is predicting the violence. So he says ki this is complete utter nonsense. There is no way Punjab can be partitioned. We know the ground. So Krishna Menon is sent by Jawaharlal. Mountbatten is in Simla those days. This is May 47. Abhi tak there is no question of the British leaving India in middle of 48 or 40. Abhi clear nahi. Krishna Menon meets Mountbatten. Again, Mountbatten. This is a handwritten note. It is. I don't know the reason it has not been typed or it's not part of the transfer power volumes. But this is available in the British Library. He says Krishna Menon came to me, and supposedly with the suggestion from the Prime Minister, from Jawaharlal Nehru, and the suggestion was to go and interact him, explore his mind. So Mountbatten senses a softness in the leadership. He says, why don't you become a member of the Commonwealth? Now, if you study the freedom movement, I mean, it was unimaginable for Tilak, Bal Gangadhar Tilak or Vinayak Savarkar or Aurobindo thinking of becoming a member of the Commonwealth. Had the offer been made, say, 50 years earlier, in the lifetime of Tilak or in the lifetime of Aurobindo, it was unthinkable. India becoming a member of the Commonwealth. ICHR has done a volume of 12,600, 700 people who have given their lives over 100 years, who were shot, who were hanged. Krishna Menon says, no, we have been, we have argued, we've been fighting the British crown and the British for all these years. So where is the question? So Mountbatten says, think over it. Krishna, but we can think of it. This is how he used to talk, I'm trying to mimic him. This is Krishna Menon typical. But we can think of it. What can we think of? If you give us Dominion status a year earlier. That note, it hits Mountbatten like a rock. He's elated. He writes that evening, that was din ki jo minutes hai, if you read those minutes, he says the idea was so brilliant, I thought it had come from my own staff. Indian Congress leadership suggesting to the Viceroy that you leave India earlier and we will join the Commonwealth. Nehru goes to Simla a few days later. We've displayed some photographs of Mashopra and the Viceroy's family driving around in Mashopra. Mountbatten rushes to London, comes back in the third week of May. The partition issue is to be resolved. The Sikhs are still angry. 30th of, around the corner, Jawaharlal is in Mussoorie. He learns that the Sikhs are not coming in line, end of May. Jawaharlal drives from Mussoorie in one day. Those days it must have been, I don't know how he must have left Mussoorie in the morning and reached Amritsar at 11 in the night. There is this historic meeting. There are no official data, no official record, but it is in a part of, in the Sikh archives, in which this meeting is recorded. And the Sikhs say, all right, we will accept partition. Then you have the 3rd June announcement. So the whole process of preponing the partition of India, and who are the people who are opposing it? Ian Stephens, the editor of the Statesman. Ian said, I am not able to understand. Pendrell Moon, the Deputy Commissioner of Amritsar, who was then shifted out from Amritsar, he says, how can we do this? All the good ground. You see, Punjab had this very hard-working set of British officers working at the field. Their assessment, some of the finest history that we have on colonial Punjab are by British historians, by British civil servants, including Pendrell Moon, Calvert and Darling and, all these. So, the idea of this whole thing being preponed takes place momentarily. Dawn comes up with the big heading, the paper being started by Jinnah, saying that this whole concept of decisions being taken in closed-door meetings is flawed. So the personal level par ye sara ho raha hai. So this, I wish to emphasize on this, that the whole final decisions, it's no groups are involved, no committees are involved, a handful of people are taking these key decisions. Let's prepone the transfer of power by a year. So this is a point that needs to be very clearly understood and appreciated. Okay. Slide 18. again, now this is some would question, all these photographs are very meaningful. They are all interlinked in a manner. At the left-hand bottom, you have Nehru in May, Mashobra is a suburb of Simla. And so they are driving around. The informality of the meeting, the manner in which the Viceroy is driving and the Prime Minister sitting with Lady Mountbatten. But more important is the other photograph. Trust me, the photograph is in my book or in the exhibition, not because the Prime Minister designate of India is sitting on the ground. That could be said it's courtesy. I mean, I would also pass it off as courtesy. But more important is that the date is more important. This is 21st, this is wrong, the date by chance is typed. It is actually 28th March. Now, 28th March 47, the Viceroy has been in India for 14 days. This is a garden party in Government House. And why is March so important? See, pick up the press of the time. The Tribune talks of 10,000 deaths in the Punjab in March. A couple of days before 28th March, 21st March, there is a report from Mewat, in about 100 kilometers from here, that 30 villages have been killed and 3,000 or 4,000 Muslims have been slaughtered. This is the kind of environment that is building up in March. And to me, when I came across this photograph, I was reasonably shocked. I said, how could it be 20? No, I thought it must be somewhere down the line. Then as a historian, I studied the dress, the clothes they were wearing. Obviously, it could not be June, July. So this is the kind of environment that is developing. And, they have two worlds. The world of the elite, the world of the ruler, the world of the, the supreme leadership, and the world at the ground. So this is one of the reasons why a young student of history should understand why the killings were allowed or why they could take place. Okay. Now, before I come to this end, just a couple of minutes more, 5 minutes more. The general perception is that the British, the idea in the exhibition, as I've explained, is that you have to understand it in link with partition. When you understand the partition of India, you must remember that the kind of environment that is planning, the kind of environment that is existing is unfathomable. It's difficult to understand or appreciate. You have warm relations. The British officers are screaming their heads off. The ground officers, again, this is a misnomer to say that more killings took place where British officers were posted. I have studied the reports of deputy commissioners and SPs in virtually all the 29 districts of the Punjab. Most of them are available at Cambridge. And I can say for sure that most of the British officers were very hardworking. Brendan, who was DC Gurgaon, said he had not had a bath for 3 days. W.H.A. Rich, the SSP of Lahore, I've seen his diaries. He was already transferred out of, he was already granted his leave, he was leaving India. 1st June he receives a message that you have to be the SSP of Lahore at the time of partition. This is the kind of environment that is prevailing. There is no government in the Punjab. Every officer is on some move or the other. If you look at the records, every Tehsildar, every SP, every officer is on move. It is a government on the move. What bigger irony can you have? The governor of Punjab makes a note, I could not secure a telephone connection in Jalandhar for 3 days. Can you imagine? Something that could have taken 3 minutes took 3 days. Orders from the governor were conveyed to the DCs and SPs over All India radio. So DCs were briefed, keep your headsets on. The order might come in from... See, you have to understand the set of complete anarchy in the Punjab. The civil servants have been given a choice. Some have chosen England, some have chosen to stay back. Most of are going. So if you are one community, you're moving. So there is the administrative hierarchy has disappeared in the Punjab. One of the reasons for this killing. Now, when you talk of the administrative system having disappeared in the Punjab, you need to put it in perspective. You need to understand it in the total picture. To cite an example, the Punjab Legislative Assembly has been divided. Its first meeting is in Simla on the 3rd of November 47. If you, without my quoting, you just read those minutes and you would be shocked and amazed. Gopichandra Bhargav, the Premier of Punjab, gets up and tells in the assembly, he says, someone said that there is a lot of corruption. He says, what corruption are you talking about? Your family has killed 3 people the other day. There is blatant corruption. The Premier of Punjab, then called he was the Premier, today's Chief Minister, we used to use the term Premier. The Premier of Punjab is saying that people are killing each other, people are, who were the people? The police, the political leaders. He cites 10 names, all top Congress leaders. You killed that person, you occupied his land, you occupied his land. Don't go to anything. Go to Teen Murti, put on the microfilm of Tribune, 3-4 November 47, and my story gets over here. Okay. So before you decide of why it happened, before you try to understand of why it happened, you have to understand the background. The exchange of population is very critical to understand. The Sikhs, who were the element of the central focal point of the Punjab's, partition, were given the understanding that partition would take place only if we arranged an exchange of population with property. So the Sikhs are given this impression. On 3rd June, when Mountbatten says there is going to be no exchange of population, the fallout of that is that the Sikhs are annoyed. 8th July 47 is in Hartal in the Punjab. It is perhaps the most powerful Hartal ever organized in Punjab's history. If you look at the reports, even the Western media is commenting, peaceful. Not a single incident in the Punjab that day. Not a single household of Sikh household had used, in rural areas we say chula jalana. Chula, you understand. The gas generation would not understand. They're all rural households. No chula was burned, no fire was lit, no one slept on the bed, no field was watered. This is the kind of feeling that is prevailing. The first meeting for the exchange of population takes place on September 5. By then, Punjab is already in anarchy. So I'm just trying to give you this example of why these killings took place, why this anarchy took place. Before I just, to give you an idea of how the common man, he is shocked into slumber. On 30th September, Punjab is in violence, brutal violence. Both the prime ministers, they get together and they take out a peace drive. On 30th September, they are traveling from Lahore to a place called Montgomery, just north of Lahore. And on the way, they encounter a convoy, a foot convoy of Sikh peasantry, mostly coming from the north of Lahore. The number goes into 30-40,000, it stretches several kilometers. And the metal road in which the PM's convoy was moving. So you can imagine, visualize a scene. As students of history, I always tell my students that try to take your mind back to the time, Things become much easier. Visualize what must have happened, visualize how they must have reacted, the expressions. So it becomes easier. Sometimes it leads you to false conclusions also, but on the whole, I think it's a very good idea. So 2 prime ministers, their escorts are waiting on the roadside. Durga Das, who later became editor of the Hindustan Times, he is there to report. He is closely observing Nehru. He writes, again, this whole story is available in the Hindustan Times. I think it should be 1st or 2nd of October 47. He writes that Nehru crossed the road, and amazingly, as he describes, not a single person from that peasantry turned towards, even as laymen, when the PM is passing by or you're stopped on a traffic light, you are curious to see, you poke your head out of the window and see what is happening. It's a normal reaction. So he says that not a single farmer is looking this side, and Nehru questions the lady. He says, "Aap kahan se aa rahe hain?" The lady responds in Thet Punjabi, "Je tu karna si," addressing the Prime Minister of India, "Tu, je tu karna hi si, dasya kyun nahi?" So then the answer shocked Nehru into slumber. Durga Das writes, for 3 minutes Nehru stood shelled. And Liaquat Ali crosses the road, holds his hand and brings him back to the car. This is the environment that is happening in 47. Okay. So before you reach conclusions, the anger, the widespread anger, I have a lot of matter here with regard to refugee camps, abduction of women, refugee camps. It's not easy. I mean, it would be unfair to question the earnestness of the government. It would not be a fair reflection. There were almost 65 refugee camps between Lahore and Delhi. Every refugee camp, every railway station had the refugee camp. But the management was overridden by corruption. British officers who were posted around, whether they were military officers. They have a lot of diaries. Russell has done an excellent diary on Karnal refugee camp. So all these things are available, the records of what happened. With regard to women, I've already referred, what happened with women. As I said, we have no figures. But everyone agrees that the saddest story of partition of India actually was the part of the women. Even today, my own colleague in my department of history, Professor Khurana, he lost two of his sisters in 47. I can tell you so many other stories. People who lost dear ones, brutally killed. So the story goes on. How we inherited a colonial system in our functioning. Supposing, it's just a query that I link with partition, and the question emerges in my mind, what if we had fought them out? What if we had forced them out? Would we still have been the same? We have several letters. In fact, one of the letters I have posted in the exhibition here. It is by a gentleman in Simla, some Sood, if you know, I'm missing the name. He writes, the British have gone, but we have the British, even more British than them in Simla. So it's not what you wear, it's not the dress that they were wearing, it is the psyche, it is the mindset. It is the mindset that was inherited. This post-partition days is actually a set of, it's a mindset, You have blatant corruption in allotment of lands, you have blatant corruption in allotment of shops. There were rules for changing land, there were rules for changing shops. If you had one shop in Anarkali, you were given one shop in Lahore or in Simla. You have examples of getting 3 shops, people who did not even apply. So in fact, I guided a PhD thesis many years ago, Dinesh Yadav, on the refugee resettlement. So we have so many interesting data coming up. So having said this, I will not be showing with the cartoons. I have a set of cartoons here, but I don't think that would be important. So the partition context, you need to understand it as a story that was horrifying from both sides. If you've been observing what the Honorable Prime Minister has been referring to, you see, the idea is to bridge the gaps. The idea is to restore the confidence among people. It was not one-sided. May have been an error, may have been whatever.